And we have a few housekeeping items. If everyone will please mute your computer, and then also select the speaker view in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. And Ann and Sally will answer your questions at the end of their presentation. So please write your questions in the chat box. Several of us will be monitoring the chat box and read the questions to Ann and Sally. And so now it is my pleasure to introduce Ann Wolford and Sally Alvis, I'm sorry, I'm getting a text message. Beth, could you help me? Paula said she's not able to launch into the program. Beth we'll work on that. So anyway, I'll turn my phone over for right now. So anyway, it is my great pleasure to introduce our speakers, Ann Wolford and Sally Alvis. They are sisters, and in addition to their DNA, they share a passion for mission-driven work. With extensive backgrounds in both nonprofit development and for-profit marketing and branding, these two most recently taught a sold-out marketing for nonprofits class for a leadership institute on a college campus. As president and founder of the Wolford Group based in the Woodlands, Ann has helped nonprofit organizations realize their fundraising potential for more than 25 years. She loves nothing better than being thrown a challenge and collaborating with an organization on a strategy for success. Sally, a journalist by education and profession, has recently retired from her senior leadership role in marketing for a regional grocer. A storyteller and brand advocate, she's using her diverse skill set to empower nonprofits to more effectively live out their mission. As adults, the sisters' first taste of the nonprofit world was in the arts arena. Sally's first board position was with the Symphony of Southeast Texas, and Ann dipped her toes in the grown-up world of volunteering with the Santa Fe Orchestra. It is with great pleasure that we welcome Ann and Sally to today's first Lunch and Learn program. Thank you so much for speaking to our group.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us. And thank you, all of you who are joining us today, for the work that you do. I think Ann and I both would say that music was part of our childhood and adulthood. And just as a little fun aside, one of our sisters just recently put together a Pandora playlist based on the music of our growing up with our parents. And it just, as you all know, music evokes such strong memories of place and time and feeling. And I think it's great that we're all coming together to have this conversation and to help each other navigate these waters. And speaking of navigating, I'm coming to you from Lufkin, Texas, which is where I live in Deep East Texas, and Ann is in the Woodlands. And we're all at different points and places, all of us in our journeys, but I think we can all share one common denominator, so to speak, and that it's been a ride these past 20 months. Not only are we emerging from an international public health crisis, but also repeated natural disasters. I think we can go to our next slide. And we are seeing in our organizations and in our own personal lives such shifts in priorities, in our personal interest and resources, how we spend them, and in capacity. When I say capacity, that's just the emotional and physical capacity, which is our lives together. And of course, as you've all seen, it's causing us all to pivot in the way we do things. And it will, especially, this is holding true in the world of nonprofits. So this is an awesome time to have this conversation that we're having today over the lunch hour and to position us to move forward in the mission-driven work that we do. One thing that I want to mention is, you know, charity kind of begins at home. And one of the things, I think, unless I got my slides mixed up here, is we'll go to the next slide, Deborah. How do we move forward? We have an opportunity at this moment to remind ourselves of the power of the roles we play as advisors and advocates on a state and local level. I think that it's fascinating that each of you brings your story and your kind of intellectual history when it comes to your love of the orchestra, the symphony orchestra, the women's league, the auxiliary, whatever role, whatever brought you to this place today, that you have an intellectual and emotional history that is very worthy and stories worth telling. And as advisors and advocates of these areas of passion, you have great influence. And you can bring your experience, the network that you have created through the years, as well as your unique perspective, through the lens that you see where we are today as it relates to the organization that you represent today or other organizations that you're involved in your local communities or on the regional or state level. That it is a time for us to think about how are we moving forward and how proactive and creative can we be and should we be to kind of emerge from these crises that we find ourselves in. And I know you have kind of a unique perspective about the way that you, an organization that you're involved with, that has had to pivot and had to, in the time of cancellations of performances, cancellations of galas and fundraisers and events, the way that you have been able to help organizations, nonprofits specifically, pivot and actually be very successful in going through and switching their perspective and switching the way they do things as you emerge from this pandemic.
Sure. And if we could just go to the next slide. And I reiterate what Sally says, we're just thrilled to be here and have this conversation with you all today. We would love for this to be a two-way street, more of a dialogue than a monologue. So again, put your questions in the chat, and I would love to just have you all put in the chat if you canceled an event this year. Yeah, just say yes or no and who you're representing, because I think we've all been there, at least in the last 20 months. Some of us have, and my company has been called upon multiple times to come up with the organization's solution to whatever is happening, a canceled event, whether to reschedule an event, just going back to the drawing board to figure out what to do in such challenging times. So what I want to say to you guys, and one of the things that I've learned in that time, is leaders set the tone for everything. And so as a leader, and whatever your position is, if you're a board member, a guild member, a volunteer, people are watching how you respond to things. I think a lot of people kind of had analysis paralysis when all of the COVID came on and didn't make a decision to do anything because they were afraid to, if they committed to one thing, it might not come through. There was so much uncertainty. And I know that all of you know that. So I know we probably don't want to talk about it too much, but I do want to say that in one of the events that Wolford Group does annually, it's a 21-year-old event. And I actually started the event 21 years ago when I worked for a healthcare organization. And we had all of the engagement of our co-chairs and our committee in 2020. This is an October event that raises money for breast cancer and ovarian cancer. Our co-chairs were great sports. We were all watching what was happening in 2020, and we ended up making our event 100% virtual, which was a complete pivot. But we got bold and we set it again for this year, this October, as a live event. We felt like both years, any year, your mission never goes away. So you can't afford to just not do a fundraiser. If you don't do an event, find another way to raise funds. So we had great buy-in from our leadership. And then the end of September came, we had sold all of our sponsorships. sponsorships were looking great, and the healthcare system decided that we couldn't do a live event because this is an event that usually has 1,200 people there. So in that, my point here about a successful event or a wildly successful event is this. We engaged our leaders, we asked them questions, we addressed their concerns. And what we did when we had to cancel our event at the end of September for our October event, we got on the phone with our top sponsors first and called every single sponsor and gave them the opportunity to keep their funds with us, make it 100% tax deductible donation, or defer. We didn't offer refunds. We did give 2 refunds that were smaller sponsorships, and we did 2 deferrals to the next year. And so I'm happy to say that because we had such buy-in, our leaders jumped in. And when I say leaders, you know, I'm a consultant, so I do it as a consultant, but I'm talking about our volunteer leaders and foundation leaders got together, made all of the phone calls, all of the communication, listened to people's concerns, their frustrations, our committee's concerns. And at the end of the day, we raised as much money as we would have raised had we done our live event, which is actually 2 events back to back. So we will be giving in January $500,000 to our charity partners. So a couple of things happened in those conversations. When we had to cancel our event, one of our donors quadrupled her gift because she understood how important our mission was. So I just want you to know that every leader is important. Everyone's information is valuable. Everybody had to be flexible. Everyone should be flexible. And we did have a few people who were naysayers. We lost one sponsor who said, I'm not participating because you canceled at the last minute. Those were things beyond our control. So anyway, don't be a naysayer. Get involved, help make the decisions, and help the organization move forward. So we can go to the next slide. That was kind of long and long-winded.
But I think one of the things that we have found, and is that we all are in a phase of resetting and rethinking, but a lot of it, again, as leaders and as volunteers, all eyes are on you, as Ann mentioned, and charity begins at home. And charity is not necessarily financial support. It's the way you conduct yourself, the way you model yourself, the way you choose what to be involved in, and at what level is that involvement. So I'm going to kind of take it to the brass tacks. All of you must share a love of music, symphonic music in specific, to be involved in this organization, especially on the regional and statewide level. But have you thought about, how do I live that out on a daily basis? Do I take my children or grandchildren or nieces and nephews to events? Do I, if I don't use my tickets, am I very deliberate or intentional about who I share my tickets with or give my tickets with to expand the scope and mission of the organization? Sometimes we just call the box office and just say, take them, but maybe this is a cultivation opportunity to give those tickets or buy a block of tickets and give them to the underserved, or give them to a new person that's just started at your job, that just moved to the community, to grow the footprint of the organization. And I think now more than ever, we're in this rethink, reset mode that we as supporters of these organizations can do some of this kind of foundational work once again that maybe we've lost touch with. Show how you're supporting the success of your organization, which, as we said, does not always mean the financial support. It's pulling people in to enjoy the experience, giving them the gift of the experience. And in time, it may cultivate that love of the arts or the organization, and which could in turn turn to a financial gift, to a true donor relationship. So The other thing is setting the expectation, and that goes back to kind of the fundamentals of being on a board of directors is you have a financial commitment to give, or you expect of those that come along with you to an event that not only will you make a financial gift, that you would hope and expect those that join with you at a fundraiser or whatever it might be will make a gift as well. And I know, Anne, you have a great example that we see this photo on the screen of this great group of folks that are obviously having a good time.
So yes, and this is actually a photo from the fundraiser that we had to cancel last year and took virtual the year before. This was in 2019, but I'm showing it to you guys because the woman in the middle owns an ad agency and she does everything for our organization for this event pro bono. So she donates a ton of staff time and makes our event beautiful in all of the collateral we produce for it. Her team gets excited about it, but her commitment to this, she got involved with this charity because her best friend was diagnosed with breast cancer and she had other people in her family who had struggled with breast cancer or other forms of cancer. So she made it her mission to bring her staff along. Not her daughter is in this picture, her daughter-in-law is in this picture, but the other people are staff members. She brings them to this every year. She explains to them what the dress code is because sometimes you just don't know. Different generations don't know always. And so she lets them know the dress code, lets them know why she's so passionate about this event, invites them to come, and lets them know that if you come as my guest, I will expect you to make a donation to the organization when you're there. So it's modeling, you know, she's showing her passion for this organization, her love for the organization. She's showing care and concern for her staff and family that they need to take care of themselves and support an organization that they love. So it's, like Sally said, it's setting an expectation, but it's modeling it and letting people know what the expectation is. Sometimes people just don't know and you can't expect that they do. So it's showing up and being intentional. So on to the next slide. Okay, so I love this. Giving USA puts this out every year, Giving by the Numbers. And it's a real snapshot of what happened in the previous year. So 2020, you might think was a complete disaster when it came to fundraising. However, we gave a total of $471.44 billion to charity, and that's with a B. They actually increased, giving was higher this past year than in 2019. But what I'd like you to look at is where did the charitable dollars go? And we'll break this slide down further in just a bit. But if you can find yourself as an arts organization, you got 4% of those donations. If you go look at the top, online giving reached its highest share of total giving on record. So we'll talk a little bit more in depth about that. But one other thing I want to show you is where the money came from. So each of you on this call is, I am making an assumption, an individual donor. You know, pay membership dues or you help raise funds and buy a table or tickets. That's where this number has been higher in the past. I've seen it as high as about 74, 75% of the bulk of where money comes from. It's at 69% right now, but I think sometimes organizations lose sight of that and just want to go for that big corporate gift. But when you look at corporate giving, it's 4% compared to 69% of individuals. Giving by foundations is 19%. And then I will say, I'm the one that talks about this with every organization I work with because nobody else wants to talk about it. Bequests, you know, if you love your symphony, that is the way that people can be the most generous in their lives. They can be more generous in death a lot of times than they can in life. So it's a conversation that if you don't have that or understand or know if your symphony orchestra offers those or is promoting the opportunity, it's as easy as making the organization a beneficiary on a life insurance policy. It's really easy to do, and it goes a long way. That's where a lot of money, $41.91 billion came from last year. So let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so arts, I'm sorry you were only in the 4% of getting that money, but you got 9.9% of your donations online. So what that's telling me is you have a good online presence. Can it use some improvement? Absolutely. But I also think that the reason some of those donations were online is because of virtual concerts or doing things virtually. So people or doing things that are alternative fundraisers to in-person events. So I would look at that 9.9 and challenge yourself to, as arts organizations, really delve into what you need to do to get online donations, because you can see in 2020, they increased to 20.7% of total, and it represents 13% of total giving. So let's go on to the next slide. Okay, so Art, is this you, Sally, or am I just running?
No, this
through
is
your
a
slide?
recap of what you just went through.
Okay, so we just looked at all of this, but this is just at a glance on this one slide for you. The opportunity to expand and really focus on online giving will make a huge difference in your organization. So let's move to the next slide, and I'm going to turn it over to Sally.
So what's
on donor
interesting,
stewardship.
it's kind of like that one and done. You make that online donation, and probably all of us have done this during this pandemic pause, that we see an opportunity. We didn't attend the event, but we got an online request and we make our donation. But only 24% of new online donors ever go on to make a second gift. The offline rate is a little bit higher, 27%, 3% higher. But why is that? Why do people make that gift and then don't make another gift or don't grow the initial gift? Some of that is lack of communication with new donors. You may get an automatically generated response when you donate online. It's just saying, thank you, Susan, for your generous gift to the Wichita Falls Symphony Orchestra. We couldn't do what we do without you. Thank you for bringing music into the lives of others. And that might be it. So that is a one and done kind of communication. Or maybe in this online giving prospect, you had incomplete donor information. Maybe it wasn't correct, or maybe the person that gave online transposed some letters and you don't have a correct email address. But I think more than anything, as easy as the online world is, it's not personal. And we've got to go back to having a personal touch point. And Ann and I feel so strongly about this, is that even though you're getting this money online and it shows that the arts, basically the arts are getting more than their share of online giving, that you've got to follow up with a personal touch point after that contact. Someone makes an online donation, get together a group of folks and make some phone calls. If you can, track that person down or chat with them on Facebook in the message, private message them to thank them and to try to find out more about why they made the donation, appreciate them, and cultivate that relationship. Because what you know is, if you don't ask, you don't get. So if you don't deepen that relationship or have some sort of touch point, you're never going to get more than what you've got. Because the numbers tell us that only a quarter of those who pledge online ever go on to make a second gift. It's a missed opportunity. So Ann's going to ask you, what's your plan? What plan do y'all have?
What's your plan? I want everybody to put your plan in the chat right now. But someone did ask about a communications plan, which it's such an important such an important component in every organization, but a lot of organizations can't do it right because they just don't have the bandwidth, you know. What I have learned in working with smaller organizations is I can help as a professional with a staff person or two, put the communication plan in place, all the messaging, here's what we want to do on this date. And it's a calendar, a template that has all of the communication, whether it's social media or phone calls or whatever. It's all in one place, but then we have utilized volunteers to do the posting, you know, so the organization has to be very protective of what information is going out there. But if you can get that and get all of it approved and have somebody post it for you that's a volunteer, that helps to stretch your resources. And then showing gratitude, like Sally said, I don't want to belabor this too much, but some interesting things I've seen with organizations are a new donor welcome packet, which I think is a great idea. I know with some of our fundraising events, we've recorded video messages from the co-chairs so that if someone makes an online gift, they automatically get a video message in their inbox thanking them personally from the chairs. It's fun. It's a little more personal, but it's another fun way to say thank you. And then always be sure to show people what their money did for the organization. So share your testimonials and your impact stories. Make sure and add your donors to your newsletter communications, and invite them. We did several of these in the pandemic. Instead of doing an annual meeting face-to-face or donor appreciation event, we did kind of a state of the organization invitation Zoom and had a grateful parent talk about how wonderful the organization has been, given an update on the organization, talked about upcoming events. So we've done that with several organizations, and people just want to be included. Bottom line, if you're putting your money somewhere, you want people to feel like it's appreciated. So let's move on to the next. So data is your friend. And I know this right now. I'm working with a group that's doing a capital campaign, and we took the time to go through their entire donor database and had a group together that could see the network, like, oh, so-and-so knows this person and he owns this company. So why don't we have him invite him to, you know, upcoming event or go to coffee or go to lunch? You need different sets of eyes on the same information to look at things like, oh, his wife passed away last year. I hope you're not addressing anything to Mr. and Mrs. Sometimes you just don't know that thing, you know that as a staff person. But when you bring in key volunteers, and it's obviously a very confidential exercise, they can bring their perspective or say, you know what, that's an old address. They haven't, and he has a new email address. That's where you can really get some help from volunteers to share the information they know and clean up that database. Because it's a lot of lost information and miscommunication if people aren't receiving your information. So conduct research, if you're interested in finding out more about this person's company and if they may support the arts, have a volunteer conduct research. Do a deeper dive into who your donors are. Does the company match donations that they work for? And going old school really just means keeping it personal, making a phone call. And like we say at the end of this, remember the little things are the big things, and they really are. So Sally, is there anything you want to say about
Well, I think
data?
your mention of the, you send the development letter or the annual ask or the invitation to an event maybe that your guild is having to Mr. and Mrs. John Smith, and John died. what the message is to the widow is they don't know me. This is not personal. They don't, they don't care to correct or to know the fact that my husband died. And it's those little things become the big things because that's part of the message. So let's continue talking about data, our best friend, data diving to grow. The next slide, please, Deborah. Grassroots development, it's tried and true. So as Ann mentioned, she would get groups of volunteers together to kind of scrub the data, go through the databases, make notes. Again, you've got to train your volunteers if they are going to do this so that they will know how to thank, let's say, that first time online donor. So maybe you're going through and you're doing some personal development with those that have donated online during the pandemic. So thank them. Then the next thing is, we are just so grateful at the Victoria Symphony that you would choose to support us. Tell us a little bit, why did you choose to make an online donation? And then listen, let people tell their story. And then all of a sudden you are in a relationship and you find out that this person went to an instrument petting zoo as a 12-year-old or an 8-year-old that was sponsored by a symphony auxiliary in their hometown. And when maybe they saw a social post about an instrument petting zoo, maybe that the Victoria Symphony did, it brought back all these memories. And so it was an impulsive donate now. They saw a social post about it, they clicked donate now, they made the contribution. But all of a sudden, this person's story, and this person, this one-time donor, knows that you care and y'all start as the organization connecting the dots to deepen that relationship, to make sure that that person is invited to any events that are coming up, or that make sure you pass that on to the symphony so they get on the mailing list of potential new subscribers for tickets. That you don't just have the conversation and hang up the phone and it's over with, that very important information that you have gleaned from listening to these donors is passed on to someone who's going to take action and cultivate that. It may not be your organization, but it may be the sister, the symphony orchestra, or the philharmonic, or whatever. But that's part of stewarding those relationships and developing a plan that personalizes the donor experience. I'll say that I was telling Ann that I was in Washington, D.C. a few weeks ago, and I went to the Museum of African-American History, and it's a fabulous museum if you've not been. Well, not a week has gone by, or even too many days, that I don't get an email or even a text message letting me know about their program of work and asking me to be part of the organization. But I've not gotten any kind of personal reach out. But I can tell you, if someone picked up the phone and called me or sent me a private message on Facebook to thank me for coming to the museum and asked me, would you, for $100, 50 school children could come in during the month of November. I mean, I'd probably write the check or send in an online donation. So anyway, it's an opportunity. But I do want to,
Sally, I'm just going to tee you up a little bit, and I don't mean to interrupt, but our next slide is about meeting the expectations of the next generation. Sally's going to address that. And I just noticed that a question to that effect popped up in the chat box. So, and I know that we want to leave time for questions. So Sally and I are going to not elaborate too much.
We tend to overspeak. So, but let me talk about the next gen. And just as go ahead.
You should do my manicure.
If you do your manicure, then you're still gonna have to go 3 weeks.
Somebody's not on.
Excuse me.
Yeah. Maybe go to the next slide.
And if everybody will please mute yourself. Thank you.
That part. So we can do the pedicure.
Okay. Here's so,
On that Wednesday.
okay. So someone's not on mute, but I'll go ahead and try to speak over them, and I apologize if I. Okay, in our effort to kind of get rid of the extraneous noise, I was temporarily muted, but let me talk a little bit about, we're talking about generational giving. and cultivating relationships and modeling how we as leaders behave. Go forward, please, to the slide. Meeting the expectations of the next gen. Just so we know, just the next gen are combined the millennials and Gen Z. So that is what we would refer to in popular culture as the next gen. Well, collectively, those two groups, which make up the next gen, gave more than any other generations during the pandemic. And this is according to Joe Fisher, who wrote an article for Forbes back in the summer. It shows, number one, the economic power and the generosity of these two, generation groups. But they have very low tolerance for difficulty in giving. In other words, if the technology is not in place, they're not going to stop and write a check or enter their credit card information or do something else. It's got to be as easy as Venmoing someone cash or calling for an Uber and writing a review. So these generations have a high expectation about the technology making it easy to give, but they're incredibly generous. So it requires organizations like your symphony orchestras or auxiliaries to make sure you have tech savvy platforms so that you can receive the generosity of these givers. These folks, this younger group as a whole, also want to know what your organization is doing. So if they give, what are you doing with that money? They research before they give. And Fisher, the author of the article, said they saw this in response to like the Snowmageddon event and recent hurricanes, is that the next gen were more likely to go online and do research than, say, baby boomers before they gave to helping organizations that responded to these natural disasters. 95% of the next gen own smartphones. And as we like to say, they're not afraid to use them. They live on their smartphones. That's their work tool. That's their communications tool. They do everything on their phones, and they spend 9 hours a day on screen. And when I say on screen, that's on the screen on their phone. That's their desktop at their home office. That's their computer at work, or it's a tablet. 9 hours a lot. So lots of opportunities for them to give, but they also want to be world changers, and they want to be part of a solution. So they want their donation or their investment to change something. So they have maybe a higher standard of excellence and a higher standard of accountability for the organizations that they give money to. They want to see the social return on their investment. So like I mentioned, if you could communicate with them, hey, your $100 took 25 students from Dallas ISD on a field trip to meet members of the symphony orchestra, or to go on a learning journey to meet a world famous cellist. I mean, they want to know my dollars, what the result was.
So that's great. I'll just jump in for the next slide because we have kind of some packed in information that I want us to get to. We have about 10 more minutes and then we'll take questions. So we're gonna go through the rest of these. We are happy. This is being recorded. So if you're taking notes and you're not capturing everything, you're welcome to access this after this. But so what we're saying is you have to invest in your organization or it's not going to work out well. And what I'm saying specifically is technology. If someone goes to your website to make a donation and they can't find the donate button, or they have to click multiple times to find it, they're going to get, discouraged very quickly or distracted to do something else. If it's not user friendly, if it doesn't show up on your phone correctly, and make sure also you have your current information on your website, your 990. Don't make it hard for someone to give you money. So I'm cautioning you about that. There are, I could speak, and so could Sally, a lot more just on that, but that is where I would be your best investment is in technology. Social media, we've talked about that. Don't have an Instagram account or a Facebook account if no one's manning it. It makes you look outdated or irrelevant. So if you have those social media channels, be sure that you put a plan in place, your messaging in place, and have somebody schedule. You can schedule like with Hootsuite to have it scheduled, have it posted on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and then make giving easy. You've got to capture the data, and just, determine who's going to reach out and make that personal touch. And then there's been so much information lately about protecting your data. Donors are trusting you with their information. So be sure you have measures in place to protect that information. You have policies and procedures around who can see that information, and just protecting your network from any kind of piracy. And words to the wise from give.org, 79% of millennials are likely to do their research. And then you see baby boomers, 56%. And Sally, you brought in the organizations must scan for unverified lookalike organizations. Is that something you want to talk about?
Just real quickly. So if I'm say a part of the next gen and I'm Googling, giving to the such and such symphony orchestra or the Symphony Women's League, whatever, and 4 different ones pop up, and I contribute to one that I think is your organization, and it's a lookalike. It's an unverified lookalike organization. I would just say that person, it's so much kind of like a buyer beware, may not realize, because they're new to giving to your organization, may not realize that's not truly you. So there's got to be someone in your group, in your organization, that is looking online just to make sure that whatever, when you Google and it pops up about your group, it is indeed your group. And if not, it needs to be reported to the IRS, because just like we've seen with every other online scam, people are trying to capture data and capture dollars, and they are creating lookalike organizations for these wildly successful symphonies or auxiliaries that raise a lot of money, and they're just thinking they could snag some by having a name or a website, a domain that is very similar to yours. So make sure that you're not being scammed, so to speak. And again, comes to brand reputation, just someone, as Ann said, has to monitor your online presence, your Yelp reviews, your Google reviews, about what you're doing. And you don't, make sure that someone is watching those and responding appropriately, because that does impact giving. At the end of the day, your organization's reputation will impact the giving picture.
Right. Okay, so let's move on to technology. Another slide on that. If you can't tell, we are passionate about this. And if it's one message you take away to your board or your guild or someone, if you don't feel like your technology is up to speed, tell somebody. So we've already, talked about missing a donation. If your website is outdated, hard to read, way too wordy, people are going to lose interest very quickly. An outdated website just implies that your services may not be up to snuff. And, anything, people are now glued to technology. People are using QR codes to get places easily. I know that that's a standard for us now with any event that we do. People just go to the QR code, which takes them directly to the giving site, and it's seamless, and everybody knows how to use them. So they expect to see those, and it's not a surprise, and it's a more streamlined process.
Well, and I think we learned it during the pandemic with ordering off a menu. Just you take a picture or scan the QR code, and there you go. So it is, I think, more essential. QR codes went away for a while, but then they came back with a vengeance during COVID because of basically online ordering and not having a touchless opportunity to order food.
So Sally, why don't you go on with the paradigm shift? The next slide.
I think now is a beautiful time for us to kind of rethink and retool the way we communicate with supporters and potential supporters. And that's either in the online digital world, it's through an annual giving letter or campaign, that maybe we don't need to look at our potential donors as just, like that annual solicitation letter, just a single-minded request to give at the end of the year, but maybe it is more of a reposition as an invitation to be part of our organization, an invitation to join with us on this journey to fulfill our mission. It's not a letter, but we said an opportunity to deepen and build relationship. Let's go back to the previous slide. So we need to think about changing the way we communicate to our supporters and elevating our ask. Don't just ask for money, because not everybody has the financial resources, especially coming out of COVID, to give, but maybe asking them to invest time in your mission. We can all use more and more volunteers to fulfill some of the programs of work that we are doing in our local communities. So ask people for their time, and invite them not just to be donors, but they are investing in the future. And I think so much of what y'all do as TASO, and also specifically some of the leagues, the women's leagues, is you're investing in education for future performers and in the lives of children. And there is nothing as important as that. And that's an emotional touch point, and people love to give but when they know it is actually changing lives out there, and that we all become owners of the organization because we are investors of our time, resources, or talents into the organization.
Okay, so after the paradigm shift, remember, on to the next slide, keep your donor at the center. How you communicate matters as much as what you say. And what I mean by that is get to know how your donor wants you to communicate with them. They may only want a text message. They don't want to see your newsletter. They want you to pick up the phone and call them. People are very specific now. Some of the largest, most philanthropic people I know would much rather have a text message than an email. They check their phones all the time, and they're very responsive, and that's what they are used to, and that works for them. So be sure to know how they want to be communicated with. When you're sharing the good news of your organization, put the donor as the hero of your story, because they're the ones making the impact with their investment of dollars. And I say donor, volunteers as well. Volunteers make this the organization successful. And then review your messaging when you're doing social media posts or newsletters or an annual appeal. Use words like you and your as opposed to we and us. So be more donor centric than organization centric. Okay, let's move to the next slide. I'm going to touch on this just very briefly because we're coming to the end of our organization. I want us to have enough time, our presentation, I want enough time for questions. Virtual medium's not going away. I think that people, especially during COVID with cancellations and events being rescheduled, look at your event and is there a way that you could do it differently, or maybe raise money a different way? Maybe add some other fundraising component that isn't particularly an event. You obviously have to think of the health and safety. If you're doing a live event, it's a great opportunity to evaluate what you're doing and possibly make a change or an addition. Always have a plan B. Know your true ROI on an event. What does it really cost you to do that between volunteer time and staff time and event costs? And then finally, in your fundraising portfolio, events should not account for any more than 33% of your overall fundraising revenue. I know that you all put on some very, very successful events, and I'm not suggesting that those need to go away, but there are some organizations who have special events as their only form of fundraising. So that's a dangerous, slippery slope if that's all you're depending on. Okay, let's go to the next slide for Sally.
Okay. And one thing that Ann and I talked about that y'all probably have seen, and it goes back to that online giving and people that are joining your events virtually, is your audience is no longer, your regional audience or your town or your city. All of a sudden, you may have people participating in the work of your organization from overseas or out of state. And just make sure that in your strategic planning that you think about how are we going to communicate with this diverse audience that we've never had before. So that's just, I'm planting that seed because we were going to bring it up a little bit earlier. But just notes to consider, and this is just a recap summary of this conversation. Your volunteers are golden. Equip them to be successful. Don't go throw them out there to go do some work or development work or phone calling if you haven't trained them. And then thank them, and thank them again. Donors, of course, your organization should be donor centric. They are your lifeline, but their data changes all the time, but their data is everything because even though it's data, it's personal, it's them, and it needs to be updated and correct. Cultivate relationships, listen for those opportunities, ask people to share their stories, why they gave, and then seek ways to engage your supporters to transform them, not as supporters. That's a very one-sided relationship, but as investors, they are invested in your mission, your program of work, what you do. And then understand that this is a time of change, embrace it with a great positivity and a can-do attitude and not be one of the naysayers, as Ann mentioned earlier in the presentation. Ann?
So, and then create a plan. I want to just have you all look at that and we'll talk more in the questions. But I guess the one thing in your communications plan, monitor your metrics. It can be expensive to make an investment in new software or constant contact or some communication tool. Same thing with your website. Know your metrics so that you can report the effectiveness of how your message is getting out there. So let's move on to the next. I think, Sally, you want to just wrap it up here and then we'll open it up for questions.
Yes, just that, music is your mission. And the beauty that's provided through music, performance, and language, we all benefit and thrive. And when we enjoy performances, we basically get out of our heads and into the art, which has profound emotional impact. And so people, the masses, are going to be appealing and coming to you and your organizations and sister and brother organizations now more than ever because they need it. So it is such a beautiful time to be in the world of the arts that you're in, because you have such an opportunity to pull in new people who appreciate, new audience members, new supporters, new volunteers, and those in turn can become new donors and investors in your organization. So we want to applaud you, Ann and I, for all the work that you do and across this great state of Texas. And we would love to hear some of your questions now. I know there's lots going on in the chat, so let's see where we want to start. I think that, let's see, Deborah or Susan, you were going to help us with throwing out some questions for us.
Yes, and thank you so much, Sally and Ann. I'll throw out some questions, and I also want to thank you for letting us record the program because I listened and intently, and I think I only got 1/10 of what y'all shared because you shared so much helpful, wonderful information. So I'm going to go back and listen to this again. So one question was, what was the app that can help schedule social media posts?
Oh, Hootsuite. So it's HOOT SUITE, and it's a program that you purchase. I don't know how much it is a month, but it allows you to go ahead and schedule all of your social media at one time, and it will send it across different social media outlets. So it's a good investment if you have a limited amount of resources. Yeah.
Okay, and this might dovetail with it. There's another question. What if we don't have a budget or funds to invest in technology? What do you recommend we do?
Okay, I'm going to jump in and then Sally, I'll let you talk. just because I'm so passionate about this, and I always feel like the money is out there somewhere if you go look for it, or if you ask a board member to underwrite, redoing your website, or talk to individual donors to say, you know what, we're looking like we're in the dark ages. Could you give us $5,000 to revamp our website? It'll make a huge return on investment. So, and then there are also grants available. There are capacity grants. You could specifically write a grant to enhance your technology. Sally?
Yes, I was going to mention that. And it's the other thing is I would never overlook the opportunity to use a college intern. A marketing intern, a social media intern, train them up, make sure they know your brand voice, make sure they understand completely the mission. It could be someone who is a music lover or a musician even, but I would actively look for some folks like that that could help you with the technology, the social media, as well as reimagining your website for a younger audience. Because if everything people see on your website, whether it's your guild or it's your symphony orchestra, is what we as 40, 50, 60-year-olds find interesting, that's not going to serve you for the long run. Maybe it was great 10 years ago, but you need to look with a fresh set of eyes from a younger perspective. And kids don't, we all know this, the younger folks, the next gen that we're referring to, they want bullets. They don't read a lot of text. Everything is written kind of in sound bites, but it's the visual that grabs their attention and that's going to tug at their heartstrings, which is going to engage them more in your content.
Right. And videos.
And videos, yes.
And so I think this may have answered the question, but I'll just read it again, is how best to engage younger generations to donate or become patrons. So I think you've given us a lot to think about, but anything else to share on?
I have noticed some very successful young professionals groups locally and down in Houston. It's when you give them the opportunity to be part of something, and set the expectation so they make some sort of investment, but it's approachable because they're growing professionals. Make it fun, make it educational. I know that we were just talking about a young professionals group this morning on my chamber call for a nonprofit organization, and they had just had a cornhole tournament, to raise money for the organization. So axe throwing is very popular. It's anything active and engaging, it's fun for young people.
And I think as long as it's safe, invite them in these young professional organizations, or even through, if you have a junior college or university campus in your community, find those organizations that might want to come in and tour something, see what you're doing, visit your concert space or your education facility, invite them to have an event there. And help them feel comfortable and welcome. So sometimes an old school, just like a tour or a visit or host a meeting at your facility goes a long way, just to kind of breaking down some barriers and inviting people in, especially when we've been so used to being at home and isolated. People are going to have to, rethink inviting people to their space and coming to other people's spaces and organization spaces.
Oh, well, thank you so much. And then let me see, there may be one other question, because somebody asked, how will we be able to access the link to view the recording? And so we will get back with you. It'll be on our Tasso website, everybody. And so Ann and Sally, thank you so much. This has just been such wonderful information that is so needed at this time for our organizations. And I will have to say that our first Listen and Learn education program has been a great success, and due to the two of you. So thank you so much for for being our speakers. And
Thank
we
you.
will, I know we will all be viewing this recording many times to get the information that you've shared with us. So thank